Hi, I'm Claire. And 3 months ago, my own mother called my boss and told him I was a convicted felon who'd been lying on my job applications. She painted me as a dangerous criminal who couldn't be trusted around computers or confidential data. What she didn't know was that my boss, David Harrison, wasn't just any executive. He was the judge who had personally thrown out all charges against me 2 years earlier because the case was built on lies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She thought she was destroying my career with one phone call, but instead, she handed me the key to everything I'd been working toward. Sometimes the people who try to bury you don't realize they're planting seeds, and today you're going to hear about the day my mother's betrayal became my greatest blessing. The fluorescent lights in TechFlow Solutions always made everything look slightly green, like we were all working underwater. I adjusted my blazer for the third time as I walked toward the conference room, my portfolio tucked under my arm, containing 2 years of late nights, weekend projects, and code that I'd written line by line to prove I belonged here. The senior developer position posting had been up for 6 weeks, and I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I started as a junior systems analyst. My reflection caught in the glass partition, professional, composed, ready. What I didn't know was that my mother had spent the morning on the phone with my boss, systematically dismantling everything I'd built. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and ambition. David Harrison sat at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. I'd worked under him for 8 months, but always from a distance. He was the kind of leader who remembered everyone's names, asked about weekend plans, and somehow made a tech company feel like a family. Patricia Wong from HR sat to his right, her laptop open and ready. Marcus Thompson, the lead developer who'd become something of a mentor, gave me an encouraging nod from across the table. Claire, thanks for coming in, David said, his voice carrying that warm authority that made him so respected. We've been impressed with your work on the Morrison account. The client specifically requested you for their next project. I felt my shoulders relax slightly. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I've really enjoyed the challenge of working with their legacy systems. Before we discuss the promotion, Patricia interjected, consulting her notes, there's something we need to address. We received some concerning information about your background that we feel obligated to investigate. The words hit like cold water. My mouth went dry, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of information? David leaned forward, his expression shifting to something more cautious. Your mother called this morning. She was quite distressed, said she felt morally obligated to tell us that you've been hiding a criminal conviction. According to her, you were found guilty of embezzlement and fraud at your previous company. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling the smooth wood grain under my fingertips. That's not true. She seemed very certain, Patricia continued, reading from her screen. She said you served time and that you've been lying on all your job applications. She mentioned you have a history of stealing from employers and that you can't be trusted with sensitive data. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, that familiar rush of panic that came whenever someone brought up those terrible 6 months 2 years ago. But alongside the fear was something else. Fury. Pure crystalline rage at the woman who had given birth to me and was now trying to destroy the life I'd rebuilt. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I was charged with those crimes, but I was never convicted. All charges were dropped. Your mother was very specific about a conviction, Patricia said, her tone professional but skeptical. She even mentioned the name of the judge who sentenced you. That's when David Harrison went very still. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition that was there, and gone so quickly I almost missed it. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those sharp eyes that I was only now realizing seemed familiar. What judge? He asked quietly. Judge Harrison, I said, and watched his face change completely. The case was dismissed, all charges dropped, when the evidence showed I was being framed by my supervisor. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked confused, Patricia was typing furiously on her laptop, and David Harrison was staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. Because, in a way, he was. Claire Martinez, he said slowly. Phoenix Systems Integration. Embezzlement charges filed by Supervisor Janet Crawford. I nodded, unable to speak. The memories came flooding back. Sitting in that courtroom in my only good suit, watching my life fall apart in real time as Janet's lies unraveled. The relief when Judge David Harrison had looked at the evidence, seen through the deception, and dismissed all charges with prejudice. I'd been so grateful, so focused on rebuilding my life, that I'd never made the connection when I interviewed at TechFlow 8 months later. You two know each other? Marcus asked, breaking the spell. David stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked downtown Phoenix. Miss Martinez, would you mind if we had a private conversation? Patricia and Marcus exchanged glances, but gathered their things without question. As the door closed behind them, I found myself alone with the man who had quite literally saved my life 2 years ago, and who was now my boss. I remember your case, he said, still facing the window. One of the most clear-cut frame jobs I'd ever seen. Your supervisor had been embezzling for months and needed a scapegoat when the auditors started sniffing around. You gave me my life back, I whispered. I don't think I ever properly thanked you. He turned around, and I could see the conflict in his expression. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did your mother know about the case when she called this morning? The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course she knew. Linda Martinez had been in that courtroom every single day, had heard Judge Harrison dismiss the charges, had seen the evidence that proved my innocence. She'd hugged me afterward, told me how proud she was that I'd fought back against the lies. She knows, I said, my voice barely audible. She was there when you dismissed the case. David sat back down heavily. So she called here knowing that you were innocent, knowing that all charges were dropped, and deliberately lied about a conviction that never happened. I nodded, feeling tears threaten. She's been angry with me for 2 years because I won't come back home, won't pretend that everything is normal. She thinks I should be grateful that she stood by me during the case, that I owe her my whole life in return. What exactly did you do to make her this angry? The question opened a floodgate of memories I'd been trying to suppress. I moved out. I got my own apartment, started building my own life instead of living in her shadow. She wanted me to move back home after the case. Said I needed her protection, her guidance. When I refused, she started sabotaging every job interview, every opportunity. David was quiet for a long moment, processing. How many other jobs has she interfered with? This is the 4th company in 2 years, I admitted. Every time I start to succeed, she finds a way to contact my supervisor, my boss, someone in authority. She tells them I'm unstable, unreliable, that I have mental health issues or a criminal past. She's very convincing. Why haven't you cut contact? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. She's my mother. She raised me alone after my father died. Part of me keeps hoping she'll remember that she used to be proud of me, that she'll stop seeing my independence as a betrayal. David stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a legal pad. Claire, I want you to tell me everything. Every job she's sabotaged, every lie she's told, every way she's interfered with your career. I want dates, names, details. Why? Because what she did today wasn't just cruel, it was potentially illegal. She made false statements about your criminal history to your employer. That's defamation, and depending on how you want to handle this, it could be actionable. I stared at him, this man who had already saved my life once and was now offering to do it again. I don't want to sue my own mother. I'm not talking about a lawsuit, he said gently. I'm talking about documentation, about creating a paper trail so that if she tries this again, you have recourse, about protecting yourself and your career. For the next hour, I laid out 2 years of sabotage, the job at Desert Tech where she'd called and said I was stealing office supplies, the position at Mountain View Software where she'd told them I had a drug problem, the startup that rescinded their offer after she contacted them, claiming I'd been fired from my previous job for harassment. Each story felt like pulling glass from an old wound. David listened without judgment, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Claire, I need you to know something. In all my years on the bench, I saw hundreds of people who'd been wrongly accused, framed, or caught up in someone else's lies. Most of them came out bitter, angry, looking for someone to blame. You came out stronger. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I feel exhausted. Strength isn't about feeling powerful, he said. It's about continuing to build something good even when people keep trying to tear it down. You've done that. You've built a career, earned respect, proven your worth. She can't take that away from you. She just did. No, he said firmly. She tried to. But the difference is, this time she picked the wrong target. I know who you are, Claire. I know what you've been through, and I know what you're capable of. That promotion you came in here for? It's yours. I felt something break open in my chest, a knot of tension I'd been carrying for months. Are you sure? After what she said? I'm sure because of what she said. Anyone who would go to such lengths to destroy their own child's future is someone whose word can't be trusted about anything. But more than that,
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I've watched your work for 8 months. I've seen how you handle pressure, how you solve problems, how you treat your colleagues. That's who you are, not whatever lies your mother tells about you. There was a soft knock on the door. Marcus peered in cautiously. Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see Claire. Says it's urgent family business. My blood turned to ice. What does she look like? Older woman, brown hair, very upset. She's in the lobby demanding to speak to management about an employee who's been deceiving the company. David and I exchanged looks. She's here, I said unnecessarily. It seems your mother isn't content with a phone call, David said, standing up. Marcus, please ask security to escort the woman to conference room B. Tell them it's a sensitive HR matter and they should remain nearby. You don't have to see her, I said quickly. I can handle this. Claire, I think it's time your mother learned that her actions have consequences. Are you willing to confront her with me there as a witness? I thought about all the times I'd backed down, all the times I'd let her railroad me into submission, because it was easier than fighting. I thought about the job opportunities I'd lost, the sleepless nights wondering if I'd ever be able to build a stable life. I thought about sitting in that courtroom 2 years ago, watching this same man restore my name and my future. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Conference room B was smaller than the one we'd been in, with no windows and harsh overhead lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Linda Martinez was already seated when we arrived, her purse clutched in her lap, and her mouth set in that thin line that meant she was preparing for battle. She looked up when David and I entered, and I saw her expression shift from determined righteousness to confusion. Claire, honey, what's going on? I was trying to help your boss understand the kind of person he's dealing with, but they won't let me speak to anyone in charge. I am in charge, David said quietly, taking a seat across from her. I'm David Harrison, Chief Technology Officer of TechFlow Solutions. Something flickered in her eyes, a moment of uncertainty. Well, Mr. Harrison, I felt it was my civic duty to inform you that my daughter has been lying about her criminal history. She's a convicted felon who's been deceiving employers about her background. Mrs. Martinez, David said, his voice carrying that same judicial authority I remembered from the courtroom. Are you referring to the embezzlement charges that were filed against your daughter in 2022? Yes, exactly. She was found guilty and sentenced to... She was found innocent, David interrupted. All charges were dismissed with prejudice, after evidence proved she was being framed by her supervisor. I know this because I was the judge who dismissed those charges. The color drained from Linda's face. She looked back and forth between David and me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. That's not possible. Judge David Harrison, Maricopa County Superior Court, he said calmly. I presided over your daughter's case for 3 months. I heard all the evidence, reviewed all the documents, and watched the prosecution's case fall apart when it became clear that Janet Crawford had been embezzling funds and using your daughter as a scapegoat. Linda's hands were shaking now. But you work here. I retired from the bench 6 months ago and took this position. Your daughter has been one of our most valuable employees. Until today, when you called and made false statements about her criminal history. I wasn't. I didn't mean. Linda looked at me desperately. Claire, tell him. Tell him about the problems you've had. The way you can't hold down a job. The way I can't hold down a job because you keep calling my employers and lying about me, I said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Mr. Harrison, my mother has sabotaged 4 job opportunities in the past 2 years by contacting employers and making false claims about my background, my mental health, and my character. David leaned forward. Mrs. Martinez, making false statements about someone's criminal history to their employer is defamation. It can result in both civil and criminal liability. Quote, you can't prosecute family disputes, Linda said, but her voice was weak. This isn't a family dispute, David replied. This is intentional interference with your daughter's employment based on statements you knew to be false. You were in my courtroom when I dismissed those charges. You knew she was innocent when you called here this morning. Linda turned to me, her expression shifting to something I'd seen countless times before. The wounded mother act that had worked so many times when I was younger. Claire, you know I was just trying to protect you. After everything we went through with that case, I was afraid you'd get hurt again. Protect me? I felt something snap inside me. You've cost me 4 jobs in 2 years. You've made it impossible for me to build a stable career. You've told potential employers that I'm a criminal, that I'm mentally unstable, that I steal from companies. How is any of that protecting me? I raised you alone, she said, her voice rising. After your father died, I sacrificed everything to give you a good life. All I've ever asked is that you stay close, that you let me help you make good decisions. You asked me to move back home and never leave your sight again. You wanted me to be grateful for the rest of my life because you didn't abandon me during the court case. I stood by you when everyone else thought you were guilty. Everyone else thought I was guilty because you kept telling people I probably was. The words exploded out of me with more force than I'd intended. Even during the trial, you kept asking me if I was sure I hadn't taken the money, if maybe I'd just forgotten about some small transaction. You never believed in my innocence, you just didn't want to look like the mother of a criminal. The room went dead silent. David was watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years listening to family drama unfold in courtrooms. Linda's face had gone red, her hands clenched into fists. How dare you, she whispered. How dare you sit there and accuse me of not supporting you? I spent every penny I had on lawyers for you. You spent money on lawyers because you were embarrassed. And the moment I was cleared, the moment I tried to build a life that didn't revolve around being grateful to you, you started punishing me for it. David cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Martinez, I think we need to focus on the issue at hand. You made false statements about your daughter's criminal history to her employer. Those statements could have cost her this job and damaged her professional reputation. I was trying to help, Linda insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. No, I said quietly. You were trying to control me. Every job I've gotten, every step forward I've taken, you've seen as a step away from you. So you've sabotaged each one, telling yourself it was for my own good, that you were saving me from disappointment. That's not true. Then why did you call my boss and lie about a criminal conviction that never happened? Why did you tell him I'd serve time when you know I never spent a single day in jail? She was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but I'd seen those tears before. They were a tool, a way to deflect responsibility and make herself the victim. I just wanted you to need me, she whispered. After the case, you were so distant, so determined to prove you could handle everything alone. I felt like I was losing you. You were losing control of me, I corrected. There's a difference. David stood up slowly. Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to be very clear about what happens next. Your daughter is being promoted to senior developer, effective immediately. Her salary will increase accordingly, and she'll be given additional responsibilities that reflect her actual value to this company. Linda's face crumpled. You can't do this. You don't understand our relationship. I understand that you attempted to damage your daughter's career with false information. If you contact anyone at this company again, if you interfere with her employment in any way, we will pursue both civil and criminal remedies. Are we clear?" She nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. "Furthermore," David continued, "I'll be documenting this incident and providing Claire with a letter detailing the false nature of your claims. Should she choose to pursue legal action for the other jobs you've cost her, this company will cooperate fully with any investigation." "Claire," Linda said desperately, reaching across the table toward me, "please, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your mother." I looked at her hand stretched toward me, at the woman who had given me life and then spent 2 years trying to destroy the life I'd built from the wreckage she'd helped create. I thought about all the times I'd forgiven her, all the excuses I'd made, all the ways I'd justified her behavior because she was family. "You're right," I said finally. "You are my mother. And that makes what you've done so much worse." I stood up, straightening my blazer, feeling something solid and unbreakable settling into place inside my chest. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for everything, both 2 years ago and today." David nodded. "You've earned this promotion, Claire. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As I walked toward the door, I heard Linda calling my name, her voice breaking with desperation. But I didn't turn around. Some bridges aren't meant to be burned, but they're not meant to be crossed again either. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can show someone is refusing to let them destroy you both. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. In my reflection in the polished metal, I saw someone I'd been searching for 2 years, the woman I was supposed to become when I stopped asking permission to exist. The afternoon sun streamed through my apartment windows as I sat on my couch, still wearing the blazer from this morning's meeting, staring at the promotion letter David had handed me before I left. Senior Developer, Tech Flow Solutions. The words looked surreal on the official letterhead, like something that belonged to someone else's life. My phone had been buzzing for the past 3 hours with calls from Linda, but I'd turned the ringer off after the 15th attempt. I thought about the first time my mother had sabotaged a job opportunity. It was 18 months ago, just 6 months after Judge Harrison had dismissed my case. I'd been working at Desert Tech as a junior programmer, finally feeling like my life was getting back on track. My supervisor, Maria Santos, had been impressed with my work on their client database system. I'd stayed late for weeks, debugging legacy code and implementing security improvements that had caught the attention of the senior partners. Maria had called me into her office on a Thursday morning in February. The desert winter was crisp outside, and I remember feeling optimistic as I walked down the hallway, thinking she might be offering me the full-time position we'd discussed. Instead, I found her sitting behind her desk with a troubled expression, a notepad covered in handwriting in front of her. "Claire, I need to ask you about something concerning," she'd said, her voice careful and professional. "I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother. She was very worried about your mental health." The words had hit me like ice water. "My mental health?" She said, "You've been struggling with severe anxiety and depression since losing your previous job. She mentioned that you've been having episodes where you become paranoid about coworkers and supervisors, that you sometimes take office supplies home because you're convinced the company is going to fire you." I'd stared at Maria in complete confusion. "None of that is true." She also said you've been seeing a therapist for what she called workplace delusions, and that your medication sometimes makes you unreliable. She wanted us to know so we could get you the help you need. The cruelty of it had taken my breath away. Linda had taken my legitimate concerns about job security after being falsely accused of embezzlement and twisted them into mental illness. She'd weaponized the therapy I'd sought to deal with the trauma of being framed, turning it into evidence of instability. "Maria, I need you to understand something," I'd said, my voice shaking but determined. "I was recently cleared of criminal charges that were filed against me by a supervisor who was actually embezzling money herself. I did seek counseling to deal with the stress of being falsely accused, but I've never been diagnosed with any mental illness, and I've never taken anything from this office." Maria had looked skeptical. "Your mother seemed very concerned. She said you've been hiding this from employers because you're embarrassed, but that she felt morally obligated to let us know before something happened." "Before something happened? What exactly did she say I might do?" "She implied that you might steal data or sabotage systems if you felt threatened. She said you've done it before when you thought you were going to be fired." The lie was so elaborate, so calculated, that it had left me speechless. Linda had created an entire fictional narrative about my mental state, my behavior, my history, and she delivered it with the concern of a loving mother trying to protect her troubled daughter. I'd lasted another 2 weeks at Desert Tech before Maria found reasons to criticize every project I touched. The full-time offer evaporated, and they let me go with the excuse that they'd decided not to expand their programming team after all. But I'd seen the way people looked at me in those final days, the careful distance my coworkers maintained, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The pattern had repeated itself at Mountain View Software 6 months later. This time, Linda had called my supervisor and reported that I had a drug problem. She'd claimed I'd been caught using cocaine at my previous job, but that the company had covered it up to avoid bad publicity. She'd described erratic behavior, missed deadlines, and violent outbursts that had never happened. The supervisor, Kevin Walsh, had been kind but firm when he'd called me in for what he'd termed a wellness check. "Claire, we want to help you get the support you need," he'd said, his face full of sympathy. "Addiction is a disease, and there's no shame in getting treatment." I'd tried to explain, tried to show him my clean drug test results from the background check they'd run when they hired me. But Linda had been convincing, had provided specific dates and incidents that sounded disturbingly plausible. She'd even offered to provide the name of the rehab facility she claimed I'd attended. By the time I'd been let go from the startup 3 months ago, I'd started recording every conversation with potential employers, documenting every claim Linda made. The startup founder, Jennifer Kim, had actually seemed angry when she'd called to rescind their offer. "I don't appreciate being lied to during the interview process," she'd said. "Your mother called and told us about your history of sexual harassment complaints. She said you'd been fired from multiple jobs for inappropriate behavior toward male colleagues." That lie had been the most devastating, because it wasn't just career sabotage, it was character assassination. Linda had painted me as someone who preyed on coworkers, who used false accusations to manipulate situations. The startup had been small, close-knit, and they'd made their decision before I'd even had a chance to respond. Now, sitting in my apartment with David Harrison's promotion letter in my hands, I finally understood the full scope of what Linda had been doing. Each lie had been carefully crafted to exploit the specific culture and concerns of each workplace. The tech company got told I was paranoid about job security. The software firm heard about drug problems. The startup was warned about sexual harassment. She'd researched each company, figured out what would be most damaging in that particular environment, and tailored her sabotage accordingly. My laptop was open on the coffee table, the cursor blinking in an empty email draft. I'd been trying to write to my father for an hour, but every time I started typing, I'd delete the words. How do you explain to someone that their ex-wife has been systematically destroying your career for 2 years? How do you describe the betrayal of a parent who says they love you while actively working to keep you dependent and defeated? My father, Robert Martinez, had divorced Linda when I was 16. He'd moved to Colorado for work and had tried to maintain a relationship with me, but Linda had made it difficult. She'd scheduled family events during my planned visits with him, had claimed I was too upset by the divorce to travel, had gradually convinced me that he'd abandoned us for a new life that didn't include me. It wasn't until I was in college that I'd realized how many of his calls she'd never passed along, how many letters she'd intercepted, how many attempts at contact she'd sabotaged. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Linda had spent my teenage years isolating me from my father, convincing me that I needed her protection from his abandonment. Now she was spending my adult years isolating me from financial independence, convincing potential employers that I needed her intervention to protect them from my instability. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the missed calls, 15 from Linda but also 3 from my father. That was unusual. We talked maybe once a month, brief conversations about work and weather and carefully neutral topics. I hesitated, then called him back. Claire, thank God, he said, answering on the first ring. I've been trying to reach you all day. Dad, what's wrong? Your mother called me this morning. She was crying, said you'd had some kind of breakdown at work, and that you'd been fired for threatening your boss. She asked me to call you and convince you to move back home where she can take care of you. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar mixture of exhaustion and rage. Even now, even after being confronted by David Harrison, Linda was still spinning the narrative to make herself the victim and me the unstable one who needed rescuing. Dad, that's not what happened. I didn't think it sounded right. You've never been the type to threaten anyone, and last time we talked, you seemed happy with your job. I was promoted today to senior developer. There was a long pause. Promoted? But your mother said, Mom has been calling my employers for 2 years and lying about me. She's cost me at least 4 jobs by telling them I'm a criminal, or mentally ill, or a drug addict, or a sexual predator. Today she called my current boss and told him I was a convicted felon. Jesus Christ, Claire, are you serious? The problem is, my boss turned out to be Judge David Harrison, the judge who presided over my case 2 years ago, who dismissed all the charges and cleared my name. So when Mom called to report my criminal conviction, she was talking to the man who personally ensured I was never convicted of anything. My father was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaky. Your mother did this? She's been sabotaging your career? Every time I get a good job, every time I start to succeed, she finds a way to destroy it. She tells my employers I'm dangerous, unstable, unreliable. She creates elaborate stories about my mental health, my criminal history, my character. And she does it while claiming she's protecting me. Why would she do that? It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Because she wants me to need her. After the court case, she expected me to move back home and let her take care of me forever. When I got my own apartment and started building my own life, she saw it as a betrayal. So she's been making sure I can't succeed independently. Claire, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of something like this. You left her, Dad. You knew what she was like. Another long pause. I left because she was controlling. Because she couldn't stand the idea that anyone in her life might have their own thoughts or goals. But I never imagined she'd try to destroy your career. She's been doing this to me my whole life in different ways. Remember how she used to tell you I was too upset to come visit you? How she'd say I didn't want to talk to you when you called? Oh, God, he whispered. I thought you'd chosen her side in the divorce. I thought you didn't want a relationship with me. I was 16 and she was my only source of information about you. She told me you'd moved on, that you had a new family in Colorado, that you were just going through the motions of staying in touch out of obligation. I called every week for 3 years. I sent birthday cards, Christmas presents, graduation gifts. I flew back for your high school graduation, and she told me you specifically asked me not to come to the ceremony because it would be too emotional. We were both crying now, grieving for the relationship we'd lost to Linda's manipulation. I thought about all the times I'd felt abandoned by my father, all the birthdays I'd waited for calls that I now realized he'd probably made. I thought about the college visits he'd offered that Linda had convinced me to decline, the summer trips to Colorado that had somehow never materialized. Dad, I need to ask you something. Did Mom ever try to sabotage your relationships after the divorce? What do you mean? Did she ever call your employers, your friends, your girlfriends? Did she ever spread lies about you to try to damage your reputation or your life? He was quiet for a moment. There was an incident at my job about a year after the divorce. Someone called HR and reported that I was sexually harassing female colleagues. It was completely false, but it led to an investigation that was humiliating and stressful. They never found any evidence because there wasn't any, but it damaged my reputation at the company. Did you ever suspect it was her? I wondered, but I couldn't prove anything. And honestly, I was so focused on rebuilding my life that I didn't want to think about it too much. What about dating? Did you have any relationships that ended because someone told your girlfriend lies about you? Another pause. Actually, yes. There was a woman I dated seriously for about a year. Jennifer. Things were going well, we were talking about moving in together. Then suddenly she became distant, started asking me strange questions about my past, about whether I'd ever been violent with women. When I pressed her about it, she said someone who claimed to be my ex-wife had contacted her with some very serious allegations about my character. What kind of allegations? That I'd been physically abusive during our marriage, that I had a drinking problem, that I'd been unfaithful with multiple women. None of it was true, but Jennifer didn't know me well enough to be certain. The relationship ended within a month. I felt sick. Linda hadn't just been sabotaging my life for 2 years, she'd been doing this to my father for over a decade. She'd systematically destroyed his relationships, damaged his career prospects, and isolated him from his daughter. And she'd done it all while playing the role of the concerned ex-wife and devoted mother. Dad, how many relationships has this happened with? 3 or 4 serious ones. I started to think I was just bad at picking partners, that there was something about me that made women lose interest once they got to know me better. It wasn't you. It was her. She's been stalking your life and destroying every good thing in it, just like she's been doing to me. But why? We've been divorced for 16 years. What could she possibly gain from ruining my relationships? Control. As long as you're alone and I'm financially dependent, she's the center of both our worlds. She's the victim who was abandoned by her husband and the devoted mother caring for her troubled daughter. If you're happy with someone else, or if I'm successful in my career, her narrative falls apart. We talked for another hour, comparing stories, filling in the gaps in each other's understanding. My father told me about job opportunities that had mysteriously evaporated, about friends who'd suddenly stopped calling, about social situations where people had seemed uncomfortable around him for reasons he'd never understood. I told him about the years of self-doubt, the times I'd wondered if maybe Linda was right about me being too damaged to succeed, the way I'd internalized her criticism until I'd almost believed I deserved the sabotage. By the time we hung up, we'd agreed to stay in closer contact, to rebuild the relationship Linda had spent 16 years undermining. But more than that, we decided to document everything. Every lie she'd told, every opportunity she'd destroyed, every relationship she'd sabotaged. Because what she'd done wasn't just cruel, it was potentially criminal. And it was time someone held her accountable. I spent the rest of the evening researching harassment laws, defamation statutes, and interference with business relationships. I called the 3 previous employers Linda had contacted and requested copies of any documentation related to her reports about me. I reached out to my father's former girlfriend Jennifer and asked if she'd be willing to speak about the allegations Linda had made. As the sun set over Phoenix, painting my apartment walls gold and orange, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 years: hope. Not just for my own future, but for the possibility that Linda's reign of manipulation might finally be ending. Tomorrow I would start my new position as senior developer. I would work with David Harrison to create an official record of Linda's interference. I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my career but my entire life from the woman who had spent decades trying to control it through lies and sabotage. But tonight I allowed myself to grieve. For the relationship with my father that Linda had stolen from us. For the career opportunities she'd destroyed. For the person I might have been if I'd grown up with a mother who wanted me to succeed instead of one who needed me to fail. I looked at the promotion letter again, at my name printed in official black ink next to the title I'd worked so hard to earn. For the first time in years, I felt proud of something Linda couldn't take away from me. Because this time, the person in authority knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was capable of. And no amount of lies could change that truth. Monday morning arrived with the kind of desert clarity that made everything seem possible. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of a navy blazer I'd bought but never worn, watching my reflection practice the words I'd been rehearsing all weekend. Today wasn't just my first day as senior developer. Today was the day I stopped running from Linda's shadow and started building something she couldn't tear down. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt different this time. Instead of the nervous energy I'd carried for 8 months as a junior analyst, I felt centered, purposeful. The doors opened to reveal Marcus Thompson waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a grin that could have powered the building. "Well, well, well," he said, handing me a steaming mug. "Look who's moving up in the world. Senior developer Martinez, I like the sound of that." "It still doesn't feel real," I admitted, inhaling the rich aroma of properly brewed coffee instead of the burnt swill from the break room machine. "Oh, it's real. David had me set up your new workstation Friday afternoon. Corner spot, dual monitors, and a view of the mountains. Plus, you're inheriting the Morrison account and 3 new clients who specifically requested you after hearing about your work." We walked through the open workspace, past the familiar faces of colleagues who nodded and smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. Ashley Kim looked up from her computer and gave me a thumbs up. Brian Foster called out, "Congratulations, Claire," from across the room. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like I'd earned my place through merit rather than surviving someone else's sabotage. My new desk was everything Marcus had promised and more. The corner location gave me privacy without isolation, and the view of the Camelback Mountains reminded me that there was a whole world beyond whatever drama Linda might try to create. I was unpacking my few personal items when David Harrison appeared at my shoulder. "Good morning, Claire. How does it feel to be officially part of the senior team?" "Terrifying and wonderful," I said honestly. "Thank you again for Friday. For everything. You don't need to thank me for giving you what you've earned, but there is something we need to discuss." His expression grew more serious. "I spent the weekend reviewing our documentation policies and consulting with our legal team. What your mother did constitutes interference with employment, and depending on how far you want to take this, it could be actionable under both civil and criminal law." He gestured toward his office, and I followed him past the glass partition that separated the executive suite from the main workspace. His office was spacious but not ostentatious, with law books mixed among technology manuals on the shelves and a photo of him in judicial robes shaking hands with the governor. "I want you to know that you're under no obligation to pursue this legally," he said as we settled into chairs across from his desk. "But I also want you to understand your options. What she did to you here, combined with the pattern of behavior at your previous employers, could constitute criminal harassment in Arizona." "My father and I talked over the weekend," I said. "She's been doing this to him for 16 years, calling his employers, sabotaging his relationships, spreading lies about his character. We think she's destroyed at least 4 serious relationships and damaged his career multiple times." David's expression darkened. "That changes things significantly. This isn't just about one incident of workplace interference. This is about a pattern of stalking and harassment, spanning multiple victims over many years. I've been documenting everything. I called my previous employers and requested copies of any reports she made about me. Desert Tech still had Maria Santos's notes from the phone call where Linda claimed I was mentally unstable. Mountain View Software had Kevin Walsh's incident report about my supposed drug problem. What about the startup? Jennifer Kim was furious when I explained what had really happened. She said if she'd known someone was making false reports about me, she would have handled it completely differently. She's willing to provide a statement about what Linda told her. David opened a legal pad and began taking notes. "And your father's experiences? He's reaching out to former employers and ex-girlfriends who might be willing to document what she told them. We're building a timeline that goes back to right after their divorce. Claire, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you prepared for the consequences of pursuing this legally? Your mother could face serious charges, and she's not going to go quietly." I thought about Linda's face in that conference room Friday, the way her wounded mother act had crumbled when confronted with evidence of her lies. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake wondering if maybe she was right about me, if maybe I really was too damaged to succeed. I thought about my father, alone in Colorado, convinced that he was somehow fundamentally unlovable, because every relationship had been poisoned by Linda's manipulation. "I'm not doing this for revenge," I said slowly. "I'm doing this because she's never going to stop. She'll keep destroying my opportunities, keep sabotaging my father's life, and maybe she'll move on to other people. Someone has to hold her accountable. Then we'll do this right. I'm going to refer you to an attorney who specializes in harassment and defamation cases, Sarah Chen, at Chen & Associates. I'll call her this morning and explain the situation. I can't afford a lawyer. You might not need to. In cases like this, if the evidence is strong enough, many attorneys will work on contingency. Plus, if we can prove a pattern of malicious interference with employment, you could be entitled to compensation for lost wages and damaged reputation. The intercom on David's desk buzzed. Mr. Harrison, there's a Linda Martinez here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent regarding Claire. David and I exchanged looks. She's here, I said unnecessarily. Are you ready to face her again? I thought about the scared woman who'd sat in this office 8 months ago, desperate for any job that might give her stability. I thought about the person who'd spent 2 years accepting Linda's version of events, making excuses for her behavior, hoping that somehow she'd remember how to be a supportive mother. That person felt like a stranger now. I'm ready. Send her up, David told the receptionist, and ask security to remain available. Linda arrived 10 minutes later, escorted by the same security guard who'd been present Friday. She looked smaller somehow, her usual commanding presence diminished by the fluorescent lights and corporate environment that had never suited her. She was wearing her best dress, the black one she saved for funerals and court appearances, and her makeup was carefully applied to hide what looked like a sleepless weekend. Claire, sweetheart, she said as soon as she saw me, her voice carrying that syrupy tone she used when she wanted something. I've been so worried about you. I tried calling all weekend, but you wouldn't answer. I had nothing to say to you. Mr. Harrison, Linda turned to David with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure Claire has told you some very upsetting things about me, but you have to understand, she's been under tremendous stress since her legal troubles. Sometimes she misinterprets innocent conversations. David's expression remained perfectly neutral. What innocent conversations are you referring to, Mrs. Martinez? Well, my phone call Friday, for instance. I was simply trying to give you important background information about Claire's history. As her mother, I felt you had a right to know about the challenges she's faced. You told me she was a convicted felon who had served time for embezzlement. I may have misspoken about some details, but the important thing is that she was involved in a very serious legal situation that affected her emotional stability. I watched David's face as Linda spoke, saw the exact moment when his judicial training kicked in. He'd spent years listening to people lie under oath, watching defendants and witnesses try to manipulate the truth. Linda's performance might have worked on employers who didn't know her history, but she was playing the wrong audience now. Mrs. Martinez, you didn't misspeak about details. You made specific false claims about criminal convictions that never existed. You told me your daughter had been found guilty and sentenced when you knew she had been completely exonerated. I was trying to protect your company from potential problems. By lying about an employee's criminal record? Linda's composure began to crack slightly. You don't understand what it's been like, watching Claire struggle with the aftermath of that case. She's been paranoid, unstable, unable to maintain steady employment. I thought if you knew the full story, you could get her the help she needs. The full story, I said quietly, is that you've been calling my employers for 2 years and lying about me to get me fired. That's not true, Claire. You know I've always supported you. Like you supported me at Desert Tech when you told them I was mentally ill and stealing office supplies? Linda's eyes darted between David and me. You were having episodes of paranoia. I was concerned about your well-being. Like you supported me at Mountain View Software when you told them I had a drug problem? You were acting erratically. I thought they should know in case you needed intervention. Like you supported me at the startup when you told them I was a sexual predator who harassed male colleagues. The color drained from Linda's face. She hadn't expected me to know about all of her calls, hadn't realized I'd been documenting her sabotage. Claire, you're taking these things out of context. What context makes it acceptable to lie about your daughter's character to destroy her career opportunities? I was trying to keep you safe. Every time you get a new job, you become more distant, more independent. You stop needing your family. I was afraid you'd get hurt again, like you did at Phoenix Systems. I got hurt at Phoenix Systems because my supervisor was embezzling money and needed a scapegoat. I got cleared of all charges and rebuilt my life. You've been trying to tear it down ever since. David leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Martinez, Claire's career isn't the only thing you've interfered with, is it? Linda went very still. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. I think this pattern of behavior extends beyond your daughter's employment. I don't have to listen to these accusations. Actually, you do, David said calmly, because making false statements about someone's criminal history to their employer is defamation. Systematically interfering with someone's employment is harassment. And if this behavior extends to other areas of their life, or to other people, it could constitute stalking under Arizona law. Linda's mask finally slipped completely. The wounded mother disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. You can't prove any of this. We already have. Claire's previous employers have provided documentation of your calls. They have records of the specific false claims you made about her mental health, her criminal history, her character. That's not interpretation or misunderstanding. That's evidence. Those companies had no right to keep private medical information. They didn't keep medical information, I said. They kept records of false reports made by a woman claiming to be concerned about her daughter's welfare. Reports that were designed to get me fired. Linda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I won't sit here and be attacked by my own child. Claire, you're making a terrible mistake. You're throwing away your family for these people who don't really care about you. My family threw me away the moment you decided my independence was a threat to your control. I gave you everything. I raised you alone, sacrificed my own happiness to make sure you had opportunities. And this is how you repay me? You sabotaged my opportunities for 2 years. You lied about me to employers, destroyed my reputation, and made it impossible for me to build a stable life. That's not sacrifice, that's abuse. Linda's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little bitch. You think you're so smart, so independent. But you'll never be anything without me. You'll fail at this job just like you failed at everything else, and when you come crawling back home, I might not be there. The words hung in the air like poison. David's expression had gone completely cold, and I realized Linda had just made a crucial mistake. She dropped the concerned mother act entirely and shown him exactly who she really was. Mrs. Martinez, David said, his voice carrying the authority of every courtroom he'd ever presided over, you need to leave this building immediately. If you contact anyone at this company again, if you interfere with your daughter's employment in any way, we will pursue both civil and criminal remedies. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm informing you of the consequences of your actions. Security will escort you out. The security guard stepped forward, but Linda wasn't finished. She turned to me one last time, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than her shouts. You think you've won something here, Claire? You think these people will protect you? They don't know you like I do. They don't know what you're really capable of when you're backed into a corner. Sooner or later, they'll see the real you, and then you'll understand what I was trying to save them from. The real me, I said quietly, is someone who refuses to be controlled by fear anymore. Someone who won't apologize for existing, or beg for approval from people who never wanted me to succeed. If that threatens you, then maybe you should ask yourself why. Linda stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes that might have been recognition. For just an instant, she seemed to see me not as an extension of herself to be controlled, but as a separate person who had grown beyond her reach. Then the moment passed, and she was just an angry woman being escorted from a building by security. After she left, David and I sat in silence for several minutes. I felt drained, like I'd just run a marathon or survived a natural disaster. But underneath the exhaustion was something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. For the first time since the court case, I'd faced Linda's manipulation, without backing down, without apologizing, without accepting responsibility for her actions. How do you feel? David asked finally. Free, I said, and realized I meant it. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. Good. Because that woman is not going to stop here. She's going to try to escalate, to find new ways to control the narrative and make you the villain. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Linda's threat, about her promise that people would eventually see the real me and turn against me. For years, that fear had kept me compliant, had made me accept her version of events rather than risk being abandoned. But sitting in this office, with my promotion letter on David's desk and a future full of possibilities stretching out before me, I realized that the thing I'd been most afraid of had already happened. I'd been abandoned by the person who was supposed to love me unconditionally, and I'd survived it. I'd more than survived it. I'd thrived. "Let her try," I said. "I'm not that scared little girl anymore. And I'm not doing this alone." David smiled for the first time since Linda had arrived. "No, you're not. We're going to document everything, build an airtight case, and make sure she faces real consequences for what she's done. To you, to your father, to anyone else she might have targeted." "What happens next?" "Next, you go back to your desk and start your new job. You work on the Morrison account, you lead your first team meeting, you do all the things you've earned the right to do. And while you're building your career, I'll be working with Sarah Chen to build a case that ensures your mother can never do this to anyone again." I stood up, smoothing my blazer, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility settling on my shoulders like armor. "Thank you, David, for everything. Thank me by being brilliant at this job. Thank me by proving that all the faith I've placed in you was justified." As I walked back to my desk, past colleagues who smiled and waved, past the corner office that could have been mine, but that I'd chosen to give up for something better, I felt Linda's words echoing in my mind. "They'll see the real you," she'd said, as if that were the most terrifying threat she could make. For the first time in my life, I hoped she was right. I hoped everyone would see the real me, the woman who'd survived false accusations and fought her way back to innocence, the daughter who'd broken free from a toxic mother's control, the employee who'd earned her promotion through talent and hard work rather than connections or manipulation, the person who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love you can show someone is refusing to let them destroy you both. I sat down at my new desk, opened my laptop, and began to work on the code that would prove, once and for all, exactly who the real Claire Martinez was. 3 weeks passed in a blur of new responsibilities and unexpected peace. I dove into the Morrison account with the enthusiasm of someone who finally had permission to use their full potential. The client, a mid-sized manufacturing company, needed their entire inventory system rebuilt from scratch. It was exactly the kind of complex, multi-layered challenge that made me love programming in the first place. Every morning, I arrived at TechFlow to find my inbox filled with project updates, client communications, and meeting requests that made me feel like a legitimate part of the business rather than someone just grateful to have a desk. Marcus had become not just a colleague but a genuine friend, someone who understood the technical aspects of my work and celebrated the small victories that came with solving particularly stubborn coding problems. The mountain view from my desk had become a daily reminder that there was a world beyond Linda's manipulation, beyond the constant fear of sabotage that had defined my professional life for 2 years. I'd started eating lunch on the building's rooftop garden, a small oasis of greenery and calm 30 floors above the Phoenix streets, where I could work through complex algorithms while watching hawks circle the distant peaks. But the real measure of my growing confidence came during client meetings. The Morrison account team had scheduled a presentation for their board of directors, and David had asked me to lead the technical portion. 6 months ago, the idea of presenting to executives would have terrified me. The fear that someone might call Linda and discover some new lie about my background would have made it impossible to focus on the actual work. Now, standing in front of 12 board members in expensive suits, explaining how our new inventory system would save them millions in efficiency gains, I felt calm and competent. When the board chair asked about my background, I answered honestly about my experience with database architecture and system integration. When another member questioned a technical decision, I walked them through the logic without second-guessing myself, or wondering if they'd already heard negative things about my character. The presentation was a success. The board approved the expanded scope we'd proposed, which meant a promotion to lead developer on the account, and a salary increase that would finally allow me to start paying down the debt I'd accumulated during the 2 years of employment instability. More importantly, it proved to myself that I could succeed on merit alone, without needing to overcome someone else's lies about my character. That afternoon, David called me into his office with an expression I'd learned meant serious business. Sarah Chen was already there, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case she believed in. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and her reputation for taking down workplace harassment was legendary in Phoenix legal circles. "Claire, I've been reviewing your case with Sarah," David began. "What we've uncovered is more extensive than either of us initially realized." Sarah opened a thick folder on David's desk. "In the past 3 weeks, we've documented systematic interference with your employment at 4 companies over 2 years. We have written statements from 3 former supervisors confirming the specific false claims your mother made about your criminal history, mental health, and character." She pulled out a timeline that looked like something from a detective's evidence board. "But it goes beyond just your employment. We've also documented her interference with your father's career and personal relationships, spanning 16 years. 2 former employers have confirmed receiving calls about alleged domestic violence and alcohol abuse. 3 ex-girlfriends have provided statements about allegations of infidelity and financial irresponsibility." I stared at the timeline, seeing my life and my father's life mapped out in Linda's wake of destruction. "This is overwhelming." "It should be," Sarah said, "because what your mother has done isn't just cruel, it's criminal. In Arizona, what she's engaged in constitutes aggravated harassment, interference with business relationships, and potentially stalking. We're looking at felony charges." David leaned forward. "Sarah has also discovered something else. Your mother's behavior fits a pattern that forensic psychologists call malicious mother syndrome, a form of psychological abuse where a parent systematically sabotages their child's independence to maintain control. The good news," Sarah continued, "is that patterns like this are recognizable to judges and juries. The bad news is that your mother isn't going to accept responsibility quietly. Based on her escalating behavior since your confrontation last week, we believe she's preparing to launch a more aggressive campaign against you." "What kind of campaign?" Sarah and David exchanged glances. "Show her," David said quietly. Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened a social media page I didn't recognize. "Your mother has created a Facebook account under a false name. She's been posting in Phoenix area community groups, warning people about a quote, dangerous individual working at local tech companies." My stomach dropped as I read the posts. Linda had written elaborate stories about an unnamed female programmer who was supposedly mentally unstable, had a history of theft and fraud, and posed a threat to clients and coworkers. She'd included just enough identifying details that anyone who knew me would recognize the description, but kept it vague enough to avoid obvious defamation. "She's also been calling your apartment complex," Sarah continued, "telling them you're behind on rent and asking about the process for eviction. She contacted your bank claiming to be concerned about unauthorized transactions on your account. She even called your dentist's office asking about your, recent behavioral changes and whether they'd noticed signs of drug use. I felt like I was drowning. She's trying to destroy my entire life." "She's trying to force you back under her control," David said. "This is what abusers do when they realize they're losing their victim. They escalate until the victim feels so overwhelmed that giving in seems like the only option." "But we're not going to let that happen," Sarah added, "because we have something she doesn't expect. We have documentation, witnesses, and most importantly, we have jurisdiction." "What do you mean?" "Your mother crossed state lines to interfere with your father's employment in Colorado. That makes this a federal case. The FBI takes interstate harassment very seriously, especially when it involves systematic interference with multiple victims over many years." The room went quiet as the implications sank in. Federal charges meant federal prison. It meant Linda facing consequences that would finally match the scope of her crimes. "How do we proceed?" I asked. "First, we get you a restraining order. With the evidence we have, it should be straightforward. Then we file criminal complaints in both Arizona and Colorado. Your father has agreed to be a witness, and his ex-girlfriends are willing to testify about the false allegations she made. What about the employers she contacted? All 4 companies you worked for have agreed to provide testimony. They're actually grateful for the opportunity because they realize she made them unwitting participants in harassment." Desert Tech's HR directors said they've changed their policies about how they handle anonymous reports because of what happened to you. David stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city sprawling toward the mountains. Claire, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about getting justice for you and your father. Your mother has probably done this to other people over the years. Children of friends, neighbors, anyone who she perceived as a threat to her control. By holding her accountable, you're potentially protecting future victims. How long will this take? The restraining order hearing is scheduled for next Friday, Sarah said. Criminal charges will probably take several months to work through the system. But the important thing is that once we file, she'll be forced to stop her campaign against you. Violating a federal restraining order is a serious crime that judges don't treat lightly. I thought about Linda's threat that people would eventually see the real me and turn against me. In a way, she'd been right. People were seeing the real me. They were seeing someone who'd survived false accusations, rebuilt her career through talent and persistence, and refused to be controlled by fear. And instead of turning against me, they were rallying to support me. There's one more thing, David said, returning to his desk. The Morrison Account Board was so impressed with your presentation yesterday that they've asked specifically for you to lead their next project. It's a 3-year contract worth over $2 million to TechFlow. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious? Completely serious. They want someone who understands both the technical and business aspects of what they're trying to accomplish. Your work on their inventory system convinced them that you're exactly what they need. What does that mean for my position here? It means you're being promoted again. Senior Project Manager, with your own team and direct client responsibility. It also means a salary that reflects your actual value to this company. The number he showed me on a piece of paper made my eyes water. It was more than I'd ever imagined earning. Enough to not just survive, but actually thrive. Enough to buy a house, take vacations, start building the kind of secure future I dreamed about during those dark months when Linda's sabotage had left me wondering if I'd ever find stability. Why are you doing this? I asked. I mean, beyond just correcting what my mother tried to destroy. Why are you going so far out of your way to help me? David was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When I was on the bench, I saw a lot of people who'd been failed by the system. People who'd been falsely accused, or who'd fallen through cracks in the process, or who'd been victimized by others' lies. Most of them never got a real chance to rebuild their lives. He paused, looking at something beyond my shoulder. Your case was different. You were clearly innocent, but more than that, you handled yourself with dignity throughout the entire process. You never blamed the system or demanded special treatment. You just wanted the truth to come out so you could move forward. I didn't have much choice. You had every choice. You could have become bitter, could have given up on building a career in tech, could have let what happened define the rest of your life. Instead, you used it as motivation to prove your worth through your work. That's rare. Sarah closed her laptop and gathered her papers. Claire, I want you to go home tonight and think about what kind of outcome you want from this process. We can pursue criminal charges aggressively, which could result in significant jail time for your mother. Or we can focus on getting her to stop the harassment and perhaps seek mental health treatment. The choice is yours. What would you recommend? Honestly, I think your mother needs to face real consequences. Her behavior has escalated over 16 years, and it's affecting multiple victims. People like her don't stop because they're asked nicely. They stop because they're forced to. After Sarah left, David and I sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Through his window, I could see the lights of Phoenix beginning to twinkle as the sun set behind the mountains. The city looked beautiful from up here, full of possibility and promise. David, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you dismissed my case 2 years ago, did you think I'd end up here? Working for you, dealing with this situation again? He smiled. I hoped you'd end up somewhere good. I could see that you had talent and resilience, but I never imagined we'd cross paths again like this. Sometimes I think the universe has a sense of justice that's more subtle than what we can create in courtrooms. Do you really think we can stop her? I think you've already stopped her, Claire. Everything we're doing now is just making it official. She's lost her power over you, and she knows it. That's why she's escalating. That's why she's getting desperate. I thought about the woman who'd raised me, who'd once driven 2 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu in college, who'd sat in that courtroom every day during my trial because she said she believed in my innocence. Somewhere along the way, love had twisted into control. Protection had become possession, and concern had turned into sabotage. I feel sad for her, I admitted. Even after everything she's done, part of me feels sorry for the person she's become. That's because you're a good person, David said. But feeling sad for her doesn't mean you have to let her continue hurting you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their destructive behavior. Will she hate me for this? She probably already does, at least in her mind. People like your mother don't distinguish between love and control. When you chose independence, she experienced it as rejection. When you chose success, she experienced it as abandonment. Nothing you do now will change that. Then why do I still care what she thinks? Because she's your mother, and that bond doesn't disappear overnight, no matter how toxic it becomes. But caring about her doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for her comfort. You can wish she was different while still protecting yourself from who she actually is. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I stopped by Marcus's desk to update him on the Morrison project. He listened with growing excitement as I described the new contract and my promotion. "Senior Project Manager," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I remember when you started here 8 months ago, so nervous you could barely speak up in team meetings. Now you're running the show. I'm terrified I'll mess it up. You won't. And even if you make mistakes, you'll learn from them and do better next time. That's what good managers do." "How do you know I'll be a good manager?" "Because you've never once thrown anyone under the bus to make yourself look better. Because you ask questions when you don't understand something, instead of pretending you know everything. Because you celebrate other people's successes instead of seeing them as threats." He paused, looking at me seriously. "But mostly because you've been tested in ways most people never are, and you've come through it with your integrity intact. Someone who can survive what you've survived and still choose kindness over bitterness is someone I'd follow anywhere." The drive home took me through downtown Phoenix, past the courthouse where David had once presided over my case, past the coffee shop where I'd sat 2 years ago, wondering if my life would ever feel normal again. The apartment complex where I lived was modest but comfortable, a place I'd chosen because it felt safe and manageable, rather than impressive. Tonight, for the first time since moving in, it felt like home rather than just a place to hide from Linda's chaos. I had a promotion to celebrate, a future to plan, and a legal team working to ensure that my mother could never again weaponize her relationship with me to destroy my opportunities. I made dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my small balcony watching the stars appear over the desert. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Heard about your promotion. So proud of you. Can't wait to hear all about it." For the first time in 16 years, I felt like I had a parent who genuinely wanted me to succeed. Not because my success reflected well on them, not because it served their needs, but simply because they loved me and wanted me to be happy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and probably new attempts by Linda to disrupt the life I was building. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The simple joy of being proud of myself without having to apologize for it, or worry about who it might threaten. I raised my wine glass to the desert stars and made a promise to the scared young woman who'd sat in a courtroom 2 years ago, convinced her life was over. I promised her that every success, every moment of happiness, every day of peace would be lived in honor of her courage to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless. The real Claire Martinez was finally coming home. The Maricopa County Courthouse looked exactly the same as it had 2 years ago, with its imposing limestone facade and bronze doors that had once felt like the entrance to my personal hell. Today, walking up those same steps with Sarah Chen and my father beside me, the building felt different. Smaller somehow, less intimidating. Just another place where justice happened, rather than the monument to my helplessness it had once seemed. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning in Judge Patricia Wong's courtroom. Sarah had explained that it would be straightforward given the evidence we'd compiled, but I still felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came with legal proceedings. My father squeezed my hand as we approached the metal detectors. "You've got this, sweetheart," he said. "And either way, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." Inside the courtroom, Linda was already seated at the defendant's table with a public defender, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She dressed carefully for the hearing, in a conservative blue suit that made her look like a concerned citizen rather than someone facing harassment charges. When she saw my father and me enter together, her face cycled through surprise, hurt, and finally cold fury. Judge Wong called the case, and Sarah stood to present our evidence. The documentation was overwhelming when laid out chronologically. Phone records showing Linda's calls to my employers, email screenshots from the fake social media accounts, witness statements from 4 companies, 3 of my father's ex-girlfriends, and 2 of his former employers. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "the evidence shows a 16-year pattern of systematic harassment targeting multiple victims across state lines. Mrs. Martinez has interfered with employment, damaged personal relationships, and made false reports to financial institutions and medical providers. This goes far beyond a family dispute." Linda's attorney stood to respond, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. "Your Honor, my client maintains that her actions were motivated by genuine concern for her daughter's welfare following a traumatic legal experience." "Genuine concern," Judge Wong repeated dryly, flipping through the evidence folder. "Mr. Harrison, are you telling me that calling employers to falsely report criminal convictions and drug use constitutes maternal concern? My client may have been overzealous in her protective instincts." "Overzealous?" Judge Wong's voice sharpened. "Mr. Harrison, your client created false social media profiles to spread defamatory content about her daughter. She impersonated concerned citizens to contact medical providers and financial institutions. She systematically destroyed employment opportunities across multiple states over multiple years." The judge turned to Linda directly. "Mrs. Martinez, do you understand the seriousness of these allegations?" Linda stood slowly, her composure finally cracking. "Your Honor, I raised my daughter alone after my husband abandoned us. I sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. When she was falsely accused of those crimes, I stood by her through the entire ordeal. All I've ever wanted is to protect her from making mistakes that could ruin her life. By making false reports about her criminal history, I was trying to save her from situations where she might be taken advantage of. She's always been too trusting, too naive about how cruel the world can be." Judge Wong looked at me. "Ms. Martinez, would you like to respond?" I stood, feeling steadier than I had any right to. "Your Honor, my mother wasn't protecting me from the world. She was protecting herself from losing control over my life. Every time I achieved independence or success, she found ways to sabotage it. She wanted me to fail so I'd have to depend on her." "That's not true," Linda said sharply. "Everything I did was out of love. Love doesn't involve lying about someone's character to destroy their career prospects," I replied. "Love doesn't involve creating fake social media accounts to spread rumors about your own child. Love doesn't involve 16 years of sabotaging my father's relationships because you couldn't accept that he'd moved on from your marriage." Linda's face went white. "You don't understand what he put me through. I understand that you've spent 16 years punishing him for divorcing you by making sure he couldn't find happiness with anyone else. I understand that you've spent 2 years punishing me for moving out by making sure I couldn't build a stable career. That's not love. That's control." Judge Wong reviewed the evidence one more time before speaking. "Mrs. Martinez, the court finds sufficient evidence to grant a temporary restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting your daughter directly or indirectly, from contacting her employers or colleagues, from posting about her on social media, and from interfering with her personal or professional relationships in any way." "You can't keep me from my own daughter," Linda protested. "The court can and will. Violation of this restraining order will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Furthermore, the court is recommending that the district attorney's office pursue criminal harassment charges based on the evidence presented today." Linda's attorney tried to speak, but she cut him off. "This is ridiculous. Claire, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your mother. You owe me better than this." I met her eyes across the courtroom. I owed you honesty, and I gave it to you. I owed you respect, and I showed it to you until you proved you didn't deserve it. I owed you love. And I loved you until you used that love as a weapon against me. I don't owe you my future. As the bailiff escorted Linda from the courtroom, she turned back one last time. You'll regret this, Claire. When you realize what you've thrown away, when you understand what family really means, you'll regret it. Maybe, I said quietly, but I'll regret it as someone who's free to make her own choices. 3 months later, I was standing in the conference room at TechFlow presenting quarterly results to the Morrison account team. The inventory management system we'd implemented had exceeded every projected efficiency gain. Client satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. The 3-year contract had been extended to 5 years, with additional scope that would require hiring 2 new developers. David caught my eye from across the table and smiled. During the break, he pulled me aside. How does it feel to be officially irreplaceable? Terrifying and wonderful, same as always, I said. Any word on the federal charges? Sarah called this morning. Linda pled guilty to interstate harassment charges. She'll serve 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Part of the plea agreement includes mandatory psychological counseling and a permanent prohibition on contacting you or your father. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of relief and sadness. How do I feel about that? However you need to feel about it. There's no right way to process watching your mother face criminal consequences for what she did to you. That evening, I drove to the same coffee shop where I'd sat 2 years ago, devastated after Linda had sabotaged yet another job opportunity. The barista recognized me and smiled. I'd become a regular during my unemployed months, nursing single cups of coffee for hours while applying for positions I was qualified for but would never get. The usual? She asked. Actually, something different today. Whatever your most expensive coffee is. I sat at the same corner table, but this time I wasn't hiding from anything. I pulled out my laptop and began working on code for a new project. Something I was developing in my spare time that might eventually become its own company. For the first time in my adult life, I had the financial stability to take risks, to dream bigger than just surviving the next round of sabotage. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. He'd moved back to Phoenix 6 months ago, partly to be closer to me and partly because Linda's imprisonment had finally freed him to live where he wanted, rather than where he thought he could avoid her interference. We had dinner every Sunday now, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been poisoned for 16 years. Proud of you today, his message read. Not just for the work stuff, but for everything. Your strength through all of this has been remarkable. I typed back, learned it from you. Thanks for not giving up on us. A year later, I was standing in the lobby of my own company, Martinez Systems Consulting, watching my team of 5 developers work on projects for clients across 3 states. The Morrison account had been so successful that David had encouraged me to start my own firm, and TechFlow had become my first major client. The business was growing faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Sarah Chen stopped by to deliver the final legal documents. All charges against Linda had been resolved, all restraining orders were permanent, and the civil settlement from TechFlow and my previous employers had provided enough capital to launch the business without taking on debt. How does it feel to officially close this chapter? Sarah asked. Like the end of one story and the beginning of another, I said. Linda spent so many years telling me I'd never amount to anything without her. Turns out, I couldn't amount to anything with her. Any regrets? I thought about it carefully. I regret that she couldn't find a way to love me without trying to control me. I regret that she wasted 16 years of her life and mine on anger and manipulation instead of building something positive. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret choosing my own path. What would you tell someone else going through something similar? That family isn't supposed to diminish you. That love isn't supposed to make you smaller. That someone who truly wants what's best for you will celebrate your independence, not sabotage it. I paused, looking around at the business I'd built from nothing. And that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly the motivation you need to become who you were always meant to be. That evening, I sat on the rooftop of my downtown Phoenix office building, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. My father was coming for dinner, bringing his new girlfriend who actually seemed to make him happy. Marcus was stopping by later to celebrate landing a new client. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who wanted me to succeed. My phone rang. An unknown number with an out-of-state area code. For a moment, my heart clenched with the old fear that somehow Linda had found a way around the restraining order. Then I remembered that I wasn't that person anymore. I was Claire Martinez, CEO of my own company, survivor of false accusations and family sabotage, builder of something real and lasting. I let the call go to voicemail. Whoever it was could leave a message, and I'd decide if it was worth my time. I'd learned that I got to choose who had access to my life, who deserved my energy, who earned the right to my attention. The sun disappeared behind Camelback Mountain, and the city lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, Linda was serving her sentence, hopefully learning that actions have consequences, and that love without respect isn't love at all. Somewhere else, my father was probably getting ready for our dinner, excited to share news about his life without fear that someone would use his happiness against him. And here, on this rooftop in the city where I'd been falsely accused, cleared, sabotaged, and ultimately redeemed, I was exactly where I belonged. Not because someone had given me permission to be here, not because I'd earned approval from the right people, but because I'd built this place with my own hands and my own determination. I'd spent 32 years learning who I was in relation to other people's expectations and limitations. Now I was finally learning who I was when I stopped asking permission to exist and started building the life I actually wanted. The woman who'd sat in a courthouse 2 years ago, watching a judge dismiss false charges, could never have imagined this moment. She'd been so focused on surviving the present that she couldn't envision thriving in the future. But every choice she'd made, every time she'd chosen dignity over defeat, every moment she'd refused to let other people's lies define her truth, had led to this rooftop, this business, this life. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to myself, something to remember on the days when the old fears tried to creep back in. You are not who they said you were. You are not limited by their vision of who you should be. You are exactly who you chose to become. Then I headed downstairs to lock up the office, pick up ingredients for dinner, and continue building the life that no one could take away from me because I'd built it to be mine and mine alone. The real Claire Martinez was finally home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.